Hey, this is the second episode with Anthony Diehl. Anthony Diehl is a fitness and diet coach and entrepreneur, and he won America's Strongest Man competition. In this second part of the episode, we talk about theology, masculinity, femininity, Christian nationalism, and more. So check out the first one first if you haven't heard it yet, and enjoy the second half of the interview. You're listening to the Spare No Arrows podcast, a show that equips Christians to stand against our anti-Christian culture. My name's Cody Lawrence, and I'm here to discuss culture, politics, theology, and building Christendom for the glory of God with courage, biblical truth, and sound doctrine. Yeah, it seems like we see on the internet, especially more recently, this weird version of masculinity that we can talk about if you've seen this kind of thing too, where people think, you have to be angry and you have to be muscular and go to the gym and you have to, like superficial things to be masculine. So what is your definition of true masculinity? And then why do you think that is happening? This like weird drift towards this weird version of masculinity.
Well, why the drift? I mean, we're just reactionary people and men with conviction. I'm this way. We tend to be pendulum swingers. If we see a thing over there that we don't like, that we objectively judge as that's bad, the natural tendency is to be like, I want to be as far away from that as possible. So I get that. So I understand it. And I'm not going to fault the young dudes who are like looking at this androgynous world we live in and looking at trans and everything else and being like, well, cool. I'm going to be as far away from the skinny jean wearing worship pastor as I possibly can. So here we go. I'm going to go to the gym and just get absolutely yoked. And this guy is over here having Bible studies, talking about his feelings and, whatever else, and just being objectively effeminate in life. So I'm just going to hard correct to the other side and then insist that whatever that is, isn't it. So therefore it has to be over here. It's just reactionary. I mean, it's almost just like legalism in the opposite direction. Legalism would be cool if it worked, man, because who doesn't want just a list, man? Just check the boxes and we're good. But instead, it requires discernment. And discernment's hard. It's much easier just to do the stark opposite of what we see. So I think that's why people just react. And I understand it. I mean, I don't ever want to ever be associated with certain aspects of femininity. So sure, I can understand why you'd want to index the other direction, but you have to be careful with that, I think.
Right. Yeah, I understand it too. And that has happened to me, and it still happens because it's natural, like you said, to have that kind of reaction to things. If you see something so bad on one side, you want to get as far away from it as possible. But in my thinking about it recently, that like reactiveness in and of itself, even if it's towards this strange hyper masculinity, I think Michael Foster calls it machoism.
Yeah.
I see that as actually effeminateness also, because
very well could be.
You're being reactive. You're letting everything else around you control you. You're not the one calling the shots. You're letting even when, the left says something and I want to believe exactly the opposite to the extreme, you're still letting the left control you. That's right. You're just letting the left control you to the inverse.
That's right. No, we're all tempted to do this. If we're all being honest, we can all have very effeminate responses to things. Sure. I mean, we have to be honest. We all can. I mean, you're spot on there. That overreactionary. Something that I've had to work on is, everybody wants to, if you're part of a group, then you want to be like all in and you want that group to think that you're all in.
Sure.
Right. Well, if somebody joins the CREC church, pretty soon you're going to be starting attending psalm sings and you're going to want to have 75 children.
Yeah.
That is not a bad thing.
Right.
Please. That's not a bad thing. But like, are you convicted about these certain things, or do you like, I have tattoos and I like them. I like my tattoos, and we could argue from Leviticus, and I grew up Baptist, man. The Old Testament didn't exist when I grew up. And so, or that was a prior dispensation. So who cares?
Yeah.
So, I really didn't have a grid through thinking through these things. And honestly, I haven't thought through tattoos a lot. Would I go back and get them now? I don't know. Maybe not. Now that I have them, I'm getting a sleeve. Eventually I'm covering up one of them, getting a sleeve of Michael the Archangel slaying the dragon, which is going to be pretty sick. But in much of our world, in Presby world, that's very much looked down upon. And so I remember there when we first joined there for a little bit being like not ever wearing short sleeve shirts because I wanted to be perceived as in, and I realized that's actually really effeminate. Like you don't have to be, who cares what other people think? Maintain your convictions and whatever. And if it departs a little bit from your in-group preference, then whatever. Who cares?
So did you get this is neither here nor there. Did you get the tattoos while you were still a Baptist or what?
Oh yeah.
When
I
was
was,
the shift
I went
in
to
your
Southern
thinking?
Baptist Theological Seminary.
Wow.
I was, I was independent fundamental Baptist the way I grew up, got black pilled or red pilled rather into the Puritans by John Piper, of course, Desiring God.
That's funny because he would be the last person to want people to end up where a lot of people end up when
Right.
when they use him as the gateway, which I think is really ironic. But yeah, that happened to
It
a lot
is.
of us. Like it starts with John Piper and then it goes much, much
Oh,
further.
dude, yeah. I was the definition of the young, restless, and reformed.
Sure.
Colin Hansen interviewed a bunch of us for that book when I was at one of the first together for the
Oh,
Gospels. Yeah. Yeah. So my undergrad is in theology. My minor was in Greek, and then I went to Southern. And so, I went down the Reformed Baptist world, and 2009, 2010, I still love him. Shout out to him, Joe Thorne. Do you know who Joe Thorne is?
I've heard of him.
Yeah, Reformed Baptist dude, and he has a hand tattoo with 1689 across it. Looks so cool. And then there's this one picture he posted a couple years ago, and it's just got his 1689 tattoo with a cigar hanging out like this, and it says "How a Baptist Does Ash Wednesday." And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. So yeah, I got that in my Baptist days.
Interesting. So it was John Piper that kind of that started you on the track to
Oh yeah,
Presbyterianism.
yes, oh yeah. John Piper reading Desiring God, which then opened my my gaze to all the Puritans. I started reading John Owen, and you just start going down that rabbit hole, and pretty soon.
Yeah. Was your intent to become a pastor or why did you go to seminary?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold here. I thought so. I wasn't sure, but yeah, I did. I went to Bible college. Met my wife there. Yeah, the intent was originally to go to ministry, and then when we graduated, we got married, immediately moved to Lexington, Kentucky. I was in Kentucky for Southern, and we were part of a Reformed Baptist church plant. And naturally, they could not pay me. I was leading worship there for years and stuff. And so, as I'm leading worship there in a non-staff role, non-paid role, naturally, I need to provide for my family. And so, I started growing my career outside of that. And it just got to the place where I was in seminary, and we found out we were pregnant with my first child, my daughter, and I just began to be like, I need to make more money for my family. And so I started growing within my professional career. And I honestly faced a lot of guilt for a long time because I realized I'm pretty good at this and I like it. I like business. I like leading. But I felt like the way I grew up in the independent fundamental Baptist world is being in the ministry is like the highest form of service. And if you can't do that, you're second rate, you're lower tier. And so it took me a while before I realized hey, the call to ministry is really serious. And I don't think I've ever been called to ministry. What I called to was my own ego, my own pride, wanting to be somebody in the eyes of, I was the opposite of the older brother. Like growing up, my friends were being stupid and getting in trouble, drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and whatever else. I was the opposite. I was the youth group leader. I preached my first sermon when I was 11 at a nursing home. I'm like singing in the choir. I'm like doing all the things that you could possibly do, going on the mission trips and all of that. And I realized very quickly I was the older brother. Like I had done all these things while my friends were out being dumb. And I remember it was actually a John Piper sermon from Isaiah, where God talks about how he will not give his glory to another. And it hit me. I'm like, dude, I am using God to build a name for myself. Oof. That's worse than just going out. I thought I was something righteous because I wasn't out there getting drunk and wasted and being foolish with my foolish friends. I'm like, no, dude, that's worse. You're trying to like actually use God for your own ends. How's that going to work out for you, bro? Like, you thought you were in a better spot. Your heart is darker. You actually think you're going to use God. So that was like a big eye-opening moment for me.
You have criticized Christian nationalism recently, and I know you're seeing a lot of the same kind of thing
Yeah.
that I'm seeing. And I didn't know where you were coming from. I didn't know you went to a CREC church, and so I assume you're not completely antagonistic towards
Not
Christian
at all.
nationalism.
No, in
Yeah, I
fact,
thought not.
now, like if someone accused me of being a Christian nationalist, I'd be like, okay. Like if somebody from CNN was
Right.
like, you're a dirty Christian nationalist, I would go, yes. Like,
Yeah.
do I think that God should be honored in the public square? Yes. I want to see the 10 Commandments posted. Yup. I want presidents swearing in, not just on the Bible, but open to Deuteronomy, invoking covenant blessings and curses. Yup, sure do. Do I want to see Muslim mosques torn down? Yes and amen all the way around. Am I concerned about, oh no, religious liberty? Nope. So a lot of people would label me as a Christian nationalist. I'm really more post-mill theonomic.
Mm-hmm.
I just am fully aware that the term Christian nationalism, and Doug Wilson talks about this, it is a pejorative lobbied against Christians.
Yep.
And so it's not the name anybody would have chosen if you were picking a name for a movement. Like, that's not it, right? But it's going to be thrown out, and I'm not scared of it. What the movement has devolved into, right? So it depends who's defining it. And that's the hard part right now is there for a while, the definition was nebulous. When you have guys like Vadi Bakum espousing his version of Christian nationalism, I'm like, yes and amen. Love that guy. Absolutely. When you get Doug Wilson or Joe Rigney or those guys talking about Christian nationalism, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And even Stephen Wolfe, I don't agree with his book entirely. We follow each other on X. I've spoken with him. He's a really nice guy. I like a lot of what he has to say. And I disagree with a lot of what he has to say. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he's even that crazy inflammatory. But his followers have like just latched onto this and used it as kind of justification or marching orders for just crazy extremism. And it's tough because 2 years ago, like, or even a year and a half ago when Milk and Honey came out, like, I did not like that book, to be perfectly honest.
Doug Wilson's book?
Yeah, Doug Wilson's book. It was just...
Oh, interesting. Why?
Well, first off, the whole covenant with Hagar thing, that's not real. That's, to me, is just exegetical trash. I just disagree with it outright. I don't think it's a thing. I will say all this to say, I think he in his pastoral wisdom, guys like him and Yuri, who I respect a lot, saw where this was going. Mm-hmm. Now, initially, when they started criticizing young men for noticing things about the Jews, I thought, okay, here was my initial thought. You guys are overkill, and you need to relax on the criticism of these young guys because it's easier to tame a zealous man than it is to get a passive man to do something. And these young men are zealous.
You think so?
And what's that?
You think so?
Oh, yeah. I would rather, and I see this in coaching all the time, I'd rather take the dude who wants to do 7 days worth of cardio and lift 9 days out of 7 and be like, hey, chill, bro. Like, we need to come back in here versus the guy who's always making excuses and you're trying to get him to push harder. It's so hard.
I'm not disagreeing. I just, something that I see, and you tell me what I'm missing, is I'm seeing a lot of the people who are overzealous, and then there is correction out there. And so like if you're training somebody who's overzealous, to me, this is like somebody who thinks their way's the best way. I have my own workout routine.
Right.
I know you've trained 1,000 people, but like, you're an idiot. I don't care what you have to say. I'm just going to do my own thing. That's kind of what I'm seeing. And it's like, I see maybe both kinds of people are unteachable, but in general,
yes.
If somebody's interested in the truth, then yeah, perhaps it totally is better or easier to train the zealous person.
Well, that was my initial thought. This is like 2 years ago. And I'm watching it devolve. And I'm thinking at first, I'm going, Doug and Yuri, you guys are being too hard on these dudes, whatever else. But then I'm watching, and these guys, I'm just going to say it, they're super effeminate. They cannot take any measure of criticism whatsoever, right? Like, they'll get so angry at Big Eva for punching right, which Big Eva does. But the second any measure of criticism comes at all, it's you're punching right and being mean, and then it's, doxing people and canceling people. I'm like, man, you guys are just as effeminate and wussified as the left. Like, this is crazy. And so I'm just watching it degenerate. And then you got guys like Corey Mahler and the Stone Choir. I don't know why anyone takes them seriously. Like, have you followed any of those guys?
No, I don't know anything about that. What's
Don't. It just, you'd be better served by licking toilet seats.
okay, wow.
But these guys are just essentially, he's a dude who was excommunicated from the Lutheran Church. And they are out and out absolute racists. They cannot stand the Jewish people, and they're getting a lot of traction among these young dudes.
Bummer.
It's wild. It's wild. It's like the inability to think is so astounding to me from all angles. Like, I'll be the first to say, I'll admit it. Okay. Hitler is probably definitively overly vilified. He is. He's overly vilified.
Because he is a human being. He's not a monster. And so not 100% of everything about him was pure evil.
Right.
But he was.
Well, and also the victor gets to write the story.
Right.
Right. So the Allies win. So naturally you're going to paint your enemy in the worst possible light. And in the process of winning, we allied ourselves with Stalin, who is objectively a billion times worse than Hitler. Mao, objectively a billion times worse than Hitler. Killed way more people. Right. We could go down that rabbit hole of, FDR and Churchill and their motives and blah, blah, blah. The point is, yeah, Hitler was unjustly or over exaggeratingly vilified compared to these other people, but he was still an absolute piece of crap. And now we're arguing over which turd is cleaner. I'm not having that argument.
Yeah.
Like, still not a great person. Why are we? So you should be able to hold all these truths in tension. You should be able to, I agree. The post-war consensus, like, we allied ourselves with communism, which hastened the decline of the West. I will say that all day, every day. Yeah. And Hitler wanted to preserve German culture. Right. And he got rid of trans and homosexuals and pornography and everything else because he knew that it weakened his men and destabilized it. Okay. There's some good. There were some elements of truth in there, but I'm not going to take that and be like, again, this is that effeminate reactionism. Well, yeah, he was the most unfairly vilified. So to make up for that, now we're going to exalt him. And literally some of these Stone Choir guys call Hitler a Christian prince.
Yeah.
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 Come on.
I had somebody in my comment section the other day saying, like, Germany was actual Christian. It was like one of the most recent Christian nations that we've ever had because Hitler established the German Christian church, and he did. But was it really Christian? No, of course it wasn't. He called it that, but I mean, shouldn't we be discerning enough to know if somebody calls themselves a Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a Christian. Mormons call themselves Christians.
Right. Exactly. And so, yeah, it's funny because I grew up in Independent Baptist world. They've got their issues. I grew up and then I kind of came of age and was in Southern Baptist world, kind of more Big Eva Gospel Coalition-y world, and they have their issues. And now I'm over here in the Reformed, not Reformed light, like we're like stout, right? Cask aged Reformed world, and
Heavy
our
stuff.
issues are just as glaring and ugly. Right. So, I will still rather deal with these issues. I would rather deal with, hey, Corey Mahler's an idiot for exalting Hitler. Nobody should listen to that guy, and deal with that baggage versus, hey, our church is ordaining homosexual women. Okay, right. Different sets of baggage, but problems nonetheless. And in our dark corner of Reformedism, some of these nefarious things are growing like mold, and we need to eradicate them.
Yeah, and the way I see it, actually, one thing I wanted to mention first was you mentioned the thing about punching right. I think it's really interesting. So I was one of those people that's like I bristle whenever a church used to punch right at all, because in the vast majority of situations, because they were leftist and they were pretending to be conservative,
right?
And they just hate people on the right, and that's totally a thing that exists 100%.
Absolutely, it does.
But if there is such a thing as a church or a ministry or a person who is an actual conservative who recognizes problems with, and I don't even want to say conservatism, because I think true conservatism, I think if you're truly on the right, these things are not actually values of the right. You're
Sure.
not on the right if you hate people because of where they come from, or
Right.
you're not actually on the right if you think Hitler is the best thing since sliced bread. Like you can call yourself on the right, but those aren't actually right values. You're not with me.
Right.
So
Exactly.
these quote unquote reformed people, it's weird, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around exactly why this is happening. Probably because my theory is because we have the closest thing to the truth. And so all of these crazy people are kind of flocking to it because they recognize those little gems of truth, but they're bringing
Sure.
their insanity with them.
Sure.
But that's not reformed. And so I wouldn't necessarily call
No,
that
I
a
think,
problem with the reformed movement. But
well,
there is a problem, and it is weird.
yeah. Well, I would say these guys are, we have a stronger stomach for the strange, the weird, and the offensive,
Yeah,
right? In the Series C,
sure.
right? So you can't, we can take a guy who says, I don't know, man, there might be something to this Hitler guy, and we're going to raise our eyebrows at him, but we're not going to cancel him. We're not going to dox him. We're not going to whatever else. We're just going to have this conversation, and we'll have a conversation. You do that inside of a Lutheran church, and you good luck, right? You're going to be kicked out, excommunicated, doxed, and you could never ask that question in a Big Eva church. And
Sure.
so I think that our corner of Christendom has a stronger stomach, and so a lot of these guys can kind of sneak in and start letting their ideas spread like gangrene because we are not overly reactive.
Sure. So then,
So yeah,
why do you think it's that's sneaking in and not critical race theory? Because we would also be willing to have a conversation with the leftists. It's just that they don't come around, and it's the extremist quote unquote right people.
well, I mean, they are sneaking, and they're just not going to sneak into our circles because that is something that we're all aligned on. Like, right? Like,
Yeah.
Corey Mahler and I think that guy is so foolish for pushing his agenda, and also I'm not scared to, because like the left is scared to ally themselves with anybody if they have one point of disagreement. It's like,
Right.
no, I'm not scared to stand there shoulder to shoulder with Corey Mahler and be like, hey, illegal immigration is a terrible idea, and there's actually an American culture we should preserve. But I'm not going to go farther than that. And he's going to go. I'll even say things like, there is a distinct American culture. I will say things like, if you immigrate to America, you are American first. It's not African American. You're American African. You are American Brazilian. You are whatever it is. You came here. You assimilate to our culture. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not also willing to just start demeaning people as objectively lesser human or the cause. The Jews are the cause of all the problems. No, fool. Look in the mirror. Human beings are. So, like, I'm willing to go so far, and then I'm not willing to go far enough. And I think young men are attracted to extremes. But also, I called this, and I feel like such an old man saying this because I'm not that old. But I remember telling my wife a decade ago, like, I did not grow up with race being a thing. When in the 90s, when I grew up, my black friend, I wanted to be black. Michael Jordan was black. Anthony Hardaway was black. They could jump and play basketball. I wanted to be black. Racism wasn't a thing. Obama brought that back. But I was a grown adult and married then. So I didn't come of age. I was watching the education system tell young white boys and girls that they have white privilege and that they should feel guilty because they're white and all this. So I didn't come of age with that. The young men that we're seeing on X now that are radicalized, they've been preached to for a decade more that they should feel guilty for being white. And I've told my wife this years ago. I'm like, dude, some of these guys are going to grow up and actually just become gay liberals and believe it. And the other ones are going to be the monster that these people are telling them they are. They're going to come into it because honestly, but by the grace of God, if I was 10 years younger, I would probably be on Twitter right now being a Hitler praising psycho because my personality is very much anti-authority in that way. You tell me I have white privilege and all this. Fine. I'll show you white privilege. Here's a swastika tat on my neck. Like, that's the kind of person I am. And so I'm thankful by God's grace. I'm a decade or so removed from that. I'm a generation up, and I watched it happen. But a lot of these young guys have been told for 10 to 15 years that they're pieces of crap because they're white and they should feel white guilt. And so they're going, oh yeah, fine. White power. How about that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and
that
so
makes
I
sense.
think
My brother is in your generation, and I remember him telling me exactly the same thing. He's like, when I was in school growing up, there was no racism. Like,
no.
Black people, white people, no matter what you were, we were all cool with each other. Like, nobody hated anybody because of race. But even when I was in school, that it totally was a thing. Like, it was brought back.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, how old are you?
I'm 32, I think. 30, yeah, I'm 32. I forget.
Right. Okay, I'm not that much older than you.
Yeah,
but,
so it was, even when I was in school, I kind of felt that kind of, it's worse now. Absolutely, it's worse now. But I kind of felt it kind of slithering its way into culture. Also, I was the first class where we had our, what was it called? LB, it's like the GSA, Gay Straight Alliance. So we had the first gay club in my school, and so like
no, I grew up playing Smear the Queer.
Yeah. Well, in school we called things gay all the time, and that was totally acceptable. But there was starting to be pushback like around that time, and I see it all being totally connected.
100% it is. Absolutely it is. So part of me has sympathy for these young men on Twitter, but the other part, and it's like, man, these guys just need to be discipled. And either they're going to be discipled by guys like Yuri and Doug and the guys in the Series C, because we're at least open somewhat to the conversation. Or they're going to be discipled by Nick Fuentes and Corey Mahler and these guys. The problem is it's gotten so rapid and out of control. 2 years ago, I thought Doug and Yuri were overreacting. The problem is it has metastasized so quickly. So now you see Yuri and Doug and different people shutting it down hard. And then everyone's whining and crying, oh, you're punching to the right. And it's like, well, yeah, sometimes you need to be punched in the face. That's the most loving thing that can happen to you, is to get punched in the face, because we love you. Don't be stupid. Hitler's not a good guy. And also, it doesn't mean we're trying to correct back to the left. You can question the post-war consensus. You can question Winston Churchill. You can think the Crusades were based. I do. I don't agree with Dr. White, but I love Dr. White. And watching these young guys just dogpile and disrespect him is just so insane to me. I'm like, that dude has done more. He's forgotten more taking a dump than these dudes will ever know. Hands down.
That's fascinating. I am not a Crusades fan. I used to be many years ago.
Sure.
But that's valuable, hearing you say that you are fine with the Crusades, and I'm sure you recognize that there's issues, but overall fine with the Crusades, and you still see James White as an ally.
Of course he is.
Of course.
Yeah, of course he's an ally. Like, what in the world? And that's just, I tell you what, drawing these weird, crazy, hard lines over stuff like that is wildly effeminate. Yeah. Like, wildly effeminate. Yeah, I don't agree with James White on everything. I mean, I dunk my babies. He's a Baptist, but I'm going to stand shoulder to shoulder with James White and Jeff Durbin and a lot of these guys. And honestly, still, I don't like his political theology, but I love John Piper. He was instrumental in my life. I've moved away from a lot of that style of thinking, but there simply is nobody better on planet Earth than suffering in the sovereignty of God. I'm thankful. I'm thankful for my independent fundamentalist upbringing. To be perfectly honest with you, some of my heroes of the faith are dispensational, and I can't stand dispensationalism.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Amen. Well, follow Anthony. He's a great dude.
Appreciate you, man.
We learned some things. I didn't know you were CREC, and as based as you are, I knew you were based, but it's pretty cool to see how similar in our thoughts we are. So that's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, man.
Maybe we'll do something again sometime.
Absolutely. Would love to.